This conversation with Louis Netherland has some fantastic insights into finding the right path after transitioning from the military and what it means to really lean into your existing network while continuing to cultivate relationships that could lead to opportunities down the road. After serving as an Army Cavalry Officer during the initial invasion of Iraq and later working as a Foreign Area Officer in the Caribbean and Latin America, Louis transitioned into business development for one of the largest aerospace companies in the world. But like many others, his path was far from frictionless. We talk about how veterans can leverage their expertise and leadership background, build strategic networks, and allow space for unexpected opportunities to change your trajectory. Thanks for joining us on this veteran venture. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military. Jack, just as a way of introduction, Louis also lives here in the best city in the United States and also get us to even faster start than we're already off to. He was a cav officer starting off in the Army, so the commonalities run deep here. Jack and I were both armor guys by trade in the Army. Jack actually could call himself an armor guy because he spent more than like 30 seconds on a tank, unlike myself. But
Nice.
we actually met in a cav unit in Germany
Oh, that's
originally.
great. Well, that's good. Yeah, my first assignment was in Schweinfurt, Germany. So, yeah, those were great days. That's for sure. So,
Right. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, were you in, was it Big Red One?
it was. Yeah, we were Div Cav for First ID. So we were out of Con Barracks in Schweinfurt, and yeah, had the whole show right there in Schweinfurt. So it was great.
Nice.
Did tank platoon leader and scout platoon leader and troop XO time there, and my first squadron commander was HR McMaster. So that's my big claim to fame. So you talk about a great first example of what right looks like.
Sure.
It was funny how, I mean, I had plenty of good chains of command after that, but I gotta say there were a lot of things that were a letdown after I left Germany. So
Do we know if there's a connection between Patrick and
I
you?
just
Right?
was thinking that, do you know Patrick Malcor?
I don't know if I do or not.
So he was in Germany with HR McMaster as a battalion commander. So it must have been some sort of overlap. He was our last podcast guest, last episode.
I
So
had
Oh,
no
really?
idea there was that commonality, but I don't know. Maybe you guys didn't know real. I don't. It seems
Oh,
would have
was
been.
was he the battalion commander of a battalion there in Schweinfurt?
Patrick was a lieutenant, and HR was his squadron commander.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, now I feel like a terrible human being.
That's wild. I didn't even put
Maybe
all
he was a
that.
little bit before my time. McMaster had been there probably about maybe a full year before I got there.
You know what? I think Patrick had just got. I think he was there. I think he was like 95 to 2000, and so he might have.
Oh, well, then that's it for sure. He probably left right before I got there because I got there in very late 2000, like October of 2000.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, that's probably it. But yeah, we definitely chewed on some of the same dirt, I'm sure. So
Great.
That's wild.
yeah, that's really cool.
And Jack's got some big red one time as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When they moved to Kansas, so I was on tanks to start out in the Big Red One in Fort Riley, Kansas.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think if I knew anybody that made that jump, but it was interesting. I taught ROTC later on in my career, and one of my cadets ended up out at Riley. I'm trying to remember which one it was. And then you know how they got all like the unit pictures up on the walls, like in the squadron headquarters and stuff. And he found my picture, like from when I was in XO and stuff. It was super funny. But yeah, that was a great unit. And
Impressive load plan for them to get all those pictures back from
no, yeah,
overseas.
I actually did think about that. I was like, man, that's a big haul if you think about it, like picking up and moving the whole headquarters. So it was more than just switching flags or reflagging, so to speak, and stuff like that. But yeah, that was a great time to be in Germany. And I mean, I got to experience the Army for almost a full year in Germany before September 11th. And so I got to experience Germany for a little while before all the madness of deployments and heightened threat environment, et cetera. So at least I got to experience a little bit of Germany the way it had been for the guys that had come way before 9/11. So
Yeah. So how did, and we love to start with just kind of your military background, but we already jumped in there. How did 9/11 change your experience in the military? And would love to hear how things played out as you moved from Germany into being a foreign area officer and otherwise.
yeah, I mean, I think being Oconus when September 11th happened, obviously got your attention a whole lot more. We were shooting gunnery at Grafenwehr, and
Heard of it?
yeah, exactly. And we had just, it was the afternoon, of course, because of course the attacks took place early in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. So in Germany, we were well into the afternoon shutting down the ranges, and we just pulled the tanks back into the motor pools there for the night. And my company commander, our troop commander, came out, and he just had a real serious look on his face. And I was like, oh yeah, what did I do? And we always, whenever we shot gunners, we always did it as much in as much of a operational environment as we could. We didn't want it to just feel like a training environment. So he came out and he said, the United States is under an attack. It looks like a terrorist attack. Lock your tanks down, get all your boys inside the barracks. And I thought it was just kind of part of what we were doing, the training scenario. But then of course, very quickly you realized that wasn't the case. And so the rest of the day and the evening was just like this blur of internet had crashed. There was no way to get news. We were getting still pixelated photos of the towers on fire. And yeah, just a real surreal. I mean, as for everybody that has a memory of 9/11 and where you were and how you reacted and what your environment was like, it's just very strange. I very distinctly remember like a private in my platoon, and he somehow got on a phone line through to his sister who lived in Lower Manhattan somehow. And he said, hey, I just talked to my sister, and she said 300 firemen are dead. And I remember saying, oh, that's crap. That's the rumor mill. There's 300 firemen, really? And sure enough, that's about how many were killed.
Wow.
And so looking back now and realizing just how monumental that attack was and the effect that forever it had on the history of our country, but at the time, there was nothing like it that had ever happened to any of us, of course. So.
No kidding. And did it alter your trajectory? Did you know that you wanted to do a career in the Army, or did you know that you wanted to go the FAO route?
No, not at that time. At that time, I was still just full speed ahead with whatever the Army had in mind for me. I was happy doing what I was doing. I was happy to be a part of the unit. So for me, it was just an instant shot in the arm as far as, okay, let's go. What's next? And hoping to deploy, hoping to be part of that and get some payback. And I mean, that was the mentality at the time, and ready to go. And I mean, a lot of us were really excited, honestly, because we were OCONUS and we were like, well, if somebody's going to go, then it's got to be us first, right? So no, just it really focused me even more and put a new sense of urgency with all of us about preparing and not just training in the field, but making sure all the equipment and vehicles were ready to go. And of course, you want to act like, of course, that's the way it is all the time in peacetime and threat environments, and that's the goal, of course, but you cannot deny when something like that happens, it definitely gets your attention. So for me, it was just helped focus me even more. But as far as how my career played out from there, just to bring it back around, I finished my time up in Germany. We did deploy into southeastern Turkey when we thought we were going to invade Iraq from the north and the south simultaneously. And so me and about 1,000 other soldiers from First ID were sent into southeastern Turkey to start doing the reconnaissance for the overland route that we were going to take through Turkey, convoying all the vehicles and then dumping off around the corner around Mardin, Turkey, and into northern Iraq. And first stop probably would have been Mosul. And so we did all this prep work for a couple of months leading up until the March invasion. And then, of course, the Turkish parliament voted no, that we weren't going to use their country as a land bridge to invade another country. And so there we were, all dressed up and no place to go. And so the short story is we all redeployed back to Germany. At that point, I was scheduled to rotate out of the unit and back to the States to start the captain's course back at Fort Knox. And that's what happened to me. So I ended up being like the football player standing in the tunnel with all your pads on, and then somebody comes walking down the tunnel saying, hey, the game's been called off. And so at that point, that was it for me. Rotated back to Knox, went through the captain's course, wasn't really sure the direction I was headed in, ended up taking a troop command at 515 Cav, the one station unit training unit there at Knox, because it was right there in my face and ready to go. So I took command of a cavalry troop with 515 Cav and did that for a couple of years, and then ended up deploying out of Fort Knox as part of a police mentor team with 1st Brigade, 1st ID to Afghanistan. So deployed to Afghanistan, did just over a year there, embedded with the Afghan National Police in Laghman Province, which is over there bordering Kunar Province and Nuristan and Nangarhar, so more towards the east. And then returned back from there with an ROTC assignment and fully expecting that I was going to get out of the Army at that point. I'd done everything I wanted to do. I did not want to be a battalion S3 or an XO in an armor unit. And it just seemed like a good, clean break. I had deployed. I had a good, quote unquote, transitional assignment teaching ROTC. It seemed like a good time to bow out. But then I got presented the opportunity to become a foreign area officer because I was post command and coming off a deployment. And long story short, I got picked up for the FAO program. So became a foreign area officer to Latin America and the Caribbean, and then went into that training pipeline it's a fairly long training pipeline to become a FAO because they send you off to get a graduate degree and to do language learning. So I went out to DLI to learn Spanish, and we lived overseas for a year in Ecuador as part of that training pipeline. So I got to take my family to Ecuador, and we lived and worked out of the U.S. Embassy there for a year, and then came back to the States, did an assignment at Defense Intelligence Agency in the Pentagon, then ended up in, of all places, I got assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean, which you could have knocked me over with a feather as far as like when I first joined the Army. If somebody told me I would have ended up on a Caribbean island for a tour, I would have told you were crazy.
No kidding.
So it's completely unbelievable. But what's interesting is it was actually one of the toughest assignments we had, just because my family and I, just because it's an island that measures 17 miles by 23 miles. And so island fever becomes a real thing. And you can stay busy with your work and find we were doing a lot of stuff to stabilize that region, counter narcotics efforts, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, because hurricanes tend to roll through that region fairly often. But at the end of the day, it's just a very small island and you're stuck on it. So, and then as far as
anyone listening to the podcast, they're probably following everything you're saying, but one thing they're not going to understand is why you didn't want to become a tank S3.
Oh yeah, right. Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah. Why wouldn't I want to hit myself?
Can't imagine why you wouldn't.
I say all that tongue in cheek. It obviously getting selected for a battalion command is a huge honor, and
of course.
And wow, what an opportunity to impact the Army. But to go through the pain of being an S3 and an XO, if it's not really your thing to begin with, yeah. So I always had a real interest in political science, international affairs. I really believe in the mission I really believe in all the tools of power of the United States to remain strong, including all the soft power tools that we have. And so the idea of military relationship building with foreign militaries, diplomacy, getting out there and forming strategic partnerships and relationships with countries in the eventuality that one day we might need their help or they might need our help. And I think the old saying in the FAO world, and I think in some SF circles, is if you need a friend, it's too late to make one. And so I always believed in that real aspect of the FAO mission, was maintaining these strategic relationships around the world in the eventuality that, you need to call in a favor or help them as well. So I think that's why FAO was appealing enough to me to extend my career in the Army for what was really another 11 years after my time in the armor community. And I really feel like I got two careers in one. I got the muddy boots career, and then I got the career that matched a lot of my personal and professional interests. So.
Yeah, I haven't stopped thinking about that route reconnaissance through Turkey either, Jack. Having done some route recons.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the number of overlays, the graphics, just the sheer C knowledge that would have to, or officer advanced course that would have to go into putting that together, that would then be disseminated across hundreds of thousands of troops from the scratch work you were doing in your Humvee or whatever vehicle you're riding. That's a heck of a list.
Always pay attention in class, kids, because it was like I'd gone through the Scout Leaders course, which I guess I don't know what they call the Scout Leaders course now, but it used to be called the Scout Platoon Leaders course. And I had done that, and we'd done measuring the radius of a curve. There's a whole block of instruction on route reconnaissance, and I paid attention. And so, like, when the moment happened, I was like, hey, I think I know how to do radius of a curve. Let's check it out.
Yeah, did you guys measure slope using the height of a soldier? That whole exercise?
I mean, I'm telling you, that thought has never like left me like that. Yeah, you're like, I remember how they coached us and taught us how to do that. And sure enough, if you're doing like quick calculations and rule of thumb kind of stuff, yeah, then you're totally doing that. So.
Yeah, takes me back, man. But I want to draw on the parallel to transitioning out of the military. And I know you went through, I want to get to your transition story as well. But you mentioned the mantra, if you need a friend, it's too late to make one. I think that's such a tremendous thing to keep in mind as people are transitioning out or as they're networking to find what's next for them. Because it starts so early. And if you're at the point where you need a job or you need to find a connection to find a job, it's probably too late to start making that connection. So I think that's such a great one-liner there to keep in mind, is always be preparing for the next thing, the next job, the next position, the next connection well in advance.
Yeah, for sure. And as I was about 2 years from getting out, I had a panic attack about the concept of a network, quote unquote. And I felt like, because everybody was talking about networking and make sure to leverage your network and things like that. And I was kind of like, I don't have a network. I've got like a bunch of Army buddies. Like I would look at LinkedIn and my connections on LinkedIn, and I'd be like, I got a whole bunch of military friends on here. I really can't make these connections as far as like, how could they really help me? And it was really hard for me to see the path of how to use a network. First, I had to convince myself that I actually had one. And I mean, I realize now that we all do, and probably we don't. I think people think that the concept of a network is I know a guy, and that guy is going to hook me up with something. And it's going to be like 0 degrees of separation. And I just wasn't thinking about the concept of a network in a very sophisticated way. And so what I learned as I started to dig into it a little bit more is that it probably is at least the 2nd degree of separation, but more than likely even the 3rd or 4th degree of separation within your network that can possibly open some doors for you, or at least maybe shine a light on a path that maybe you should go down when you're going through that experience. So I encourage people, when you look at your network, don't shoot it down right away, but look at it in a more sophisticated way as far as those, like I said, those 3rd and 4th order or 4th degrees of separation.
Well, thank you for that honesty, because I think most people are thinking that, but
Yeah.
maybe not able to admit that. I don't know how to leverage my network. The Army told me where to PCS, and I went and I met people and I crushed it. Maybe I worked
Mm-hmm.
really hard and I developed relationships and I created friendships, but not many people are really understanding how that network on the outside is going to work. And but you also simplified it on the back end. Hey, you might not have understood that clearly when you were in the military, but it is just about putting yourself out there, talking to people about what your goals are, and inquiring about what they're doing. And that is going to lead to the, oh, well, I do know a guy who's into this who might be able to introduce you to, and it's crazy how it does happen. But that's really great advice, because I think most people are in that same mindset. They're like, I don't know how to do this networking thing. I'm not even on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah. And everybody just thinks it's like it's going to be that one person,
Right. And even more so, I mean, like you transitioned after retirement, correct? I assume.
That's right.
Like even more so, if you're a 26-year-old kid, you might be a little bit more on social media, but you might not be on LinkedIn, or you might not understand. It's like you're a little bit in a different situation even before, if you're transitioning from service after 8 years or 5 years or whatever it is.
For sure. Yeah. And it's super intimidating. And then you get on LinkedIn and you read people's posts on LinkedIn and you read people's profiles on LinkedIn. And then you start getting imposter syndrome. And then you start thinking, oh, I'm so far behind. All these people have these really shiny LinkedIn profiles. But it's not true. It's an absolute lie. I mean, I would encourage anybody that if you are 26, 27 years old and you get on LinkedIn, do not be intimidated by that. It's a tool to just tell an honest story about yourself, and to have like yourself on record, on digital record of who you are and what interests you and what you're here to do. And it's not the end all be all, and you definitely shouldn't be intimidated by it, but it's hard.
Right.
I just had this thought. I think, you mentioned it's also often the 2nd, 3rd, 4th order connections that you make that result in some sort of progress. I think we probably developed this false notion that you have the one right person with the answer. Like in the Army, you go to the S4 to solve your logistics problem. You go to the S2 to solve your intel problem. There is one person you can go to, and that's your little network within the unit. And people often think that it's like a silver bullet like that outside of the military. You go to this one person who has a cool looking job or a cool sounding job, and you think that's going to solve your problem of finding the next thing. But it's not a silver bullet. It's literally like a fishing net. It's casting that wide net. And one thing that's 2 or 3 layers down within that net is actually what's going to result in something. It's not going to the one person who you think is the S2 that has that intel solution. It's the second or third person that person connects you with. And I think maybe the Army or the military in general kind of breeds that thought that you go to one person because that's the person who's the subject matter expert in this area. And that's just not the case outside.
Yeah, and yeah, that's absolutely correct. And to illustrate, I mean, I'm the living example of that too. I mean, in my case, the way that I ultimately got hired into the job that I have now, it wasn't my best friend in the Army. It wasn't a guy that I talked to all the time or anything like that. It was another Army FAO that had retired about 3 years prior to me. And it's a simple story. His company called him and asked him if he wanted his old job back. He said, no, I appreciate it, but I've got a good thing going on right now. I've got a GS job. It looks like it's tracking to something pretty good, so I'm going to stick with this. And they said, okay, well, do you know any other recently retired, I'm not kidding, recently retired FAOs for Latin America? And he said, well, probably. Let me call around and see. And we had stayed in touch just enough that my name popped into his head and he gave me a call. And he said, hey, I got this call. Do you mind if I drop your name? And I said, no, by all means, let's do it. And when I tell that story, it sounds simple. And to use your fishing analogy, like with the net, I'll use the analogy of the more lines that you have in the water, the greater the statistical probability is of you catching a fish. And so I had put out so many lines that when that happened, the story might sound like it's luck, but not really. It's probably just a numbers game. And this guy knew me and I knew him and we were friends, but we weren't like beer drinking buddies that hung out every weekend. But it just so happened that because I had maintained semi-regular communication with him, he knew that I was recently retired. And so my name popped into his head.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And maintain communication with people who are in similar situations, and that could happen, right? I think whatever your resume says, let's look at communicating with people like that or staying in contact with people like that, because I've heard of that happening a lot, actually. It's, hey, I might not be the right fit, but there's definitely somebody who I know who is, whether that's like a Facebook community where you're part of, hey, Latin America FAOs or something like
Right.
that. You're
Yeah.
just communicating with like-minded people or people who have similar backgrounds or similar interests. Those things circulate all the time. And I think the connection piece, if we're getting a little tactical for people on how to network, join some groups with people who the Facebook group is the name of something you're interested in. And now you've got something to at least start a conversation, and that could lead to a connection down the line.
Well, just LinkedIn too. Like it might be intimidating going on there and trying to figure out how to build a LinkedIn profile, but just the fact that you have one or that's moderately active is a way for somebody who is a recently retired FAO who specialized in Latin America. You can actually search that sort of thing on LinkedIn to some degree, and so that's an easy way to have your name out there. And if you post a little bit on there every now and then, you just, to Lewis's point, yeah, I love the line. You said, we stayed in touch just enough for him to think of me when that opportunity came. And that's all it takes is just staying in touch just enough. You don't have to be with them every weekend, like you said, but I think that's such a helpful point.
Yep.
And not to lead the witness here, but I know that wasn't your first job out of the military. So could you talk about that process, how it left yourself open to pivots or to changing direction? Because I think that's another big thing people deal with is feeling like they need to pick their next decade right as they get out.
Yeah, that's true. As I was finishing up my time in the Army, I was probably about 9 months out from starting terminal leave. And I was going through a series of events in my life that were pretty emotional and highly stressful. So my mom was sick. She eventually passed away. She went through this kind of long period of an illness leading up until just shortly before I got out of the military. I'm an only child. My dad had already passed, so it fell on me to manage that situation. Simultaneously, I was trying to retire from the Army and then simultaneously trying to find a job. And I got offered a position very early on by a management consulting firm here in Raleigh. And I just took it because it was a great company. It is a great company, great people, seemed like a great culture. I was moderately interested in what we were doing. It might not have been my first choice, but I certainly could get motivated to work there. And honestly, I just couldn't take another thing. And maybe some of your listeners feel that way too. I'll just take the job because it seems like it's good enough. And so that's what I did. And I had worked there only for about gosh, only for about 8 weeks. And things were going fine. Again, it was a great place. But then my buddy that I told about in the story before, he called me up and said, "Hey, can I drop your name for this position?" The only reason I even remotely considered it is because the job description for what he was going to submit my name for was written for somebody with like my skill sets. And because of my interest in international business development, those were things that I knew I was interested in doing. I just felt like that opportunity wouldn't come along again. And so I had a super awkward conversation with the company that had just hired me. They were extremely gracious and understanding, and we were able to part almost before we even got started. And then I jumped over to this new role. So a little irregular, but illustrative of some of the points you were making about how there can be a tendency, I think, when you're departing the military to really feel stressed about what the future holds. And whether you're single or whether you have the responsibility of a family, being in the military, you've got a paycheck that you're used to coming in really regularly. And you do enjoy a high degree of job security comparative to the civilian world. And so when that feels like it's going away, as you start to depart the military, the stress level gets ramped up. And it was that way for me for sure. And so a lot of people take the first job that's offered to them. And I understand that. And I think you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if you do that, but also leave yourself open to the idea that, you know, just because you take the first thing that's offered to you when you get out of the military, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to stay there for the rest of your life. Or, you don't have to. I think in the military, we have this idea, commitment to an organization. I'm going to be a part of this organization and I am going to just give it my all. And I am completely devoted to the mission, and quitting is not an option. But in the civilian workplace, it can be a different story. And so, yeah, shouldn't. I think I've always said, don't be afraid to have a rebound girlfriend or a rebound boyfriend, as it were. Don't feel like when you're coming off of a long-term relationship that you have to go into a long-term relationship being a military career. Don't feel like you have to immediately jump into another long-term, deeply committed relationship. You don't have to get it right the very first time. Don't be afraid to have a transitional job. Don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel like you've somehow failed that you haven't been able to find the perfect job coming right out of the military, because it's not likely to happen.
That's a phenomenal point. I think people need to realize that, and it's like you're already changing so much. You're most likely changing geography. Some people might be PCSing or getting out of the military from Germany or some and moving halfway across the world and picking up and starting over. So to create some guaranteed nature, like it's okay to take the job that is, hey, I've got this. It's at least a job.
Right.
Let me get to geographically where I want to end up, and then I can figure out the next steps. And Griffin, to your point at the beginning, which we have talked about before, you're not married to another decade in a single location or a single job. But what we haven't heard the advice of, hey, no, it's okay if it's not a perfect job. It's okay if it's not exactly your calling. What we've really talked about in the past is guiding people to find the right job. But I think it's great to say, hey, if it doesn't work out in your perfect little timeline that you have to transition where you start your next job on your terminal leave, it's completely okay. And you'll eventually find something that works for you.
Especially as you're picking up some additional skills, you're learning how things work outside of the military, learning how much actually does come out for taxes that you weren't seeing out of your LES, those sort of things. Probably providing some stability for your family amidst all the other changes that Lewis mentioned. I mean, yeah, I think that's such a tremendous message. It's okay to find something that's not perfect and then iterate from there to work your way back towards something that might be a better fit. Well, with that in mind, Lewis, would love to hear more about the job that you did end up that you're in now. Would love to hear what you're working on and the current update of where you're at.
Yeah. So the company that I accepted the position with was or is Collins Aerospace. So one of the three companies under the RTX family of companies. So what a lot of us used to call Raytheon is now called RTX. There's three companies under RTX: Collins Aerospace, Pratt and Whitney Engines, and then a third, just to keep everybody confused, a third company that they've called Raytheon. And so took the job with Collins Aerospace on the international BD team, so international business development, and was assigned to work the Latin America market, so defined as Mexico and everything south of Mexico. And so to encourage sales of our products and solutions at Collins Aerospace in international markets. And so I got a little bit of an education about the difference between sales, straight sales, and business development, expanding the definition a bit of sales to look strategically at opportunities as well, not only opportunities to sell products, but also to create partnerships, to work with other companies, to provide solutions for an end user, different things like that. So working the Latin America market, I did that for about 3 years with Collins Aerospace, and then got changed over to address the market in the United Kingdom. So for about the past year and a half, I was working the UK market and offering them products from Collins Aerospace to support the mission of the Armed Forces of the UK. So that was a great experience. Got a lot of travel in, got to know the UK very well, got all the touristy locations knocked out in like my first visit or two. And so I could start looking at some of those other places off the beaten path. That was a great experience for me, and love the people that I work with. And then most recently, just really about 2 or 3 months ago, I switched portfolios to the assured position navigation and timing portfolio at Collins Aerospace. So it's essentially navigation devices for ground platforms for both the US market and the international market. I'm representing this group of products, all nav related. So getting to scratch the itch of some of my international BD experience, but also harkening back to my days on armored vehicles and vehicles of all sorts in the Army that need navigation solutions. So it's an interesting kind of full circle moment for me to come back around and start representing products that I myself used in the Army. So
I ignorantly did not know that Raytheon was actually just one of the subsidiary companies of RTX. I did not know that relation.
Yeah, well, you aren't too. That only happened within the past 18 months or so you're not too far behind.
Okay, yeah, I know Pratt and Whitney, know some folks that work there, but yeah, that's putting all the pieces together. That's interesting. I'm curious, Louis, who do you think, if we're talking to people looking at getting out, or maybe who've already gotten out or trying to figure out what their next steps are, who do you think would be a good fit for a defense contractor like Collins Aerospace, or for the type of work that you're doing, if given the fact that they're not a Latin American focused retired FAO officer, if they don't have the perfect resume for the role that you found yourself in originally? I know you're not in that role anymore, but what kind of person fits the avatar?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a business development role in any major aerospace or defense company in this industry, I think for a business development role, I think that the aperture is fairly wide. I don't think you don't necessarily need to bring in a highly technical background. I was a history major, for heaven's sakes. There's a lot of value in the business development community for former military personnel who honestly have the street credibility to be able to go to customers and end users and understand how they're going to understand the challenges that the end user has, understand like the concept of the operation, what's the problem that they're trying to solve, what's the equipment that could, that you can offer that would most help them solve that problem. I mean, a lot of those dots are connected by someone who has general on-the-ground military experience, likely linked to the product or solution within the portfolio that you're interested in working for.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like at Collins Aerospace, there are a lot of pilots, and it's because those pilots have the experience of operating communications and navigations equipment that's mounted on air platforms, and so they can relate to the customer and the end user in a way that someone off the street could not. So that's extremely beneficial, just to have that general military experience of seeing that technology in action, so to speak. So I hope I answered your question there. I don't know if I.
Yeah, you did. You did. And I imagine there's a lot of, and you mentioned the number of pilots, which makes complete sense. I imagine there's a lot of former military that you work with. And so naturally, with a lot of military folks together, they probably have created similar structures, maybe some hierarchy or procedures that look similar to the military too. So is it true to say that it probably feels somewhat familiar to people that have left the military to work in a company like that? Of course, it's got all sorts of civilian differences, but it probably is not too dissimilar from things that people have come from. And so it would be a pretty relatively smooth transition, not like you're going to some small tech startup in San Francisco.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's not to say that everybody that works for Collins has military experience, because they don't. There's a lot of extremely talented, gifted, intelligent individuals that are engineers, for example, that have no military experience whatsoever, but are just off the charts in their aptitude for engineering solutions and things like that. But certainly when you work for a company like that, there is a large population of former military, and it can be a comfort zone, so to speak, where you can relate a little bit more to the way things are done when you're dealing with people like that and that kind of background. So it can it certainly is a lot easier of a transition than, like you said, if you rolled straight up into a startup out of San Francisco or something like that.
Some people want to transition and feel like it's 180 from the military. They just want a fresh start entirely. But others, a lot of folks want something that feels familiar, that they recognize that their expertise from spending decades maybe in the military can really readily translate to. So it seems like a good option for a lot of folks.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was one of those people, or at least thought I was one of those people, that I wanted to do a 180-degree turn. And I actually, for a while there, was like, oh, I don't want to work. I'm not even going to look in the aerospace and defense industry. I just want to, it was a great run. I want to leave the ball on the field and start something fresh and new. And I thought that way for a long time. And then I realized that I was cutting off my nose to spite my face. It's like, why would you deny yourself the opportunity of the experience that you built and the skills that you've developed that could offer you some leverage when you're applying for a job? Because don't discount the value that you bring with your military experience to the aerospace and defense industry. I mean, I know that's like a blinding flash of the obvious, but kind of what you were saying, there's a lot of folks, and again, I was one of them, that was like, well, I'm just going to avoid that and just do something completely different. And that's fine. And go chase that down. And you may very well be successful and find something that's super rewarding. But I encourage people not to completely say, I'm not applying to the defense industry, because you are ceding all of that military experience that you worked so hard to gain that's really valuable to companies, that cannot be replicated by someone that did not serve in the military. So, right. Yeah. So don't completely dismiss the idea. Yeah.
For sure. Well, there's a two-part question, Louis, that we ask every guest, one ask and one give. So the first being one ask. What's one way somebody listening to this could help you or provide value to you?
Well, I'll tell you, I am always looking for opportunities to volunteer within my local community and maybe get more involved with veterans organizations. And I have done a craptastic job pursuing that. So we moved here to Raleigh at the height of COVID. Everything was still locked down for certainly the first year and almost year and a half that we lived here. And so I always feel like I'm on a 5-minute delay of integrating myself into the local community and reaching out there. And then I got focused obviously on work and family, and just didn't take the time to really pursue those volunteer opportunities to engage with other veterans. And so if anyone is listening who has an organization that in the Raleigh-Durham area that they're interested in recruiting people for to help out, then I'm more than happy to learn more about what you do and maybe get involved.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to do.
Great. And then one give, what's one thing, whether it's advice or resources or recommendations you'd offer to people listening?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in karma. So I really do believe that helping others and trying to be that person that people can talk to and trying to pay it forward will eventually come back to reward you. And so I certainly, to anyone who is transitioning out of the military, needs someone to talk to or wants to bounce some ideas off of or anything like that, I am making myself available. And feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And again, I can't promise you that I'll have all the answers. I can't promise you that I'll help you find a job. But if you just need someone to talk to or bounce ideas off of or dig a little deeper into maybe learning more about the aerospace and defense industry or what my experience was like, then I'm happy to expound on that.
Well, thank you for that. And if you can't find something or make a connection, I'm sure one of your second or third order connections can.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Louis, thanks again for taking the time to talk with us. Your story is one that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, and especially I think your story of the first several years after you left is one that a lot of people will be able to take a lot from. So thanks for sharing with us, being open to do that. And I'd pass it back over to you just to conclude. Any final thoughts or parting wisdom for someone listening to this who might be currently transitioning or looking at that in their immediate future?
Well, I would just say, I mean, we touched on it. It's okay to admit that this is an extremely intimidating and stressful process. And I think when you see people that have been quote unquote successful in the process, you can start to feel like, well, how is that ever going to happen for me? And I feel like I'm starting from zero, and you'll have maybe some interviews or you'll apply to some jobs and you either won't get an answer back at all, or maybe you'll have an interview and you think it went really well, but then you don't get the job offer. It can seem like it's just all dumb luck, but it's not. Continuing to push through, continuing to drop lines into the water, again, it's a statistical probability thing. Your ship will come in, so to speak, and good things will happen. But it's not luck. And I remember speaking to a very senior FAO that had gotten out. This was early on in my job search, where I was just doing informational interviews and calling people up and just trying to understand what their story was and what they did. And I mean, I must have done dozens and dozens of these calls. And he got this super high speed job that I just thought was the greatest. And I was like, oh my gosh, why couldn't that ever happen for somebody like me? And I remember he told me, well, you don't use me as an example. This whole thing was just luck that I fell into this. And I remember being really disappointed and angry with that response. And I was like, don't say that. It's not luck. It's just that you have to put yourself out there and make yourself available. And you've got to walk down a few paths. And some of those will be dead ends. But if you keep on doing it, you're going to find your way. It's going to be emotional on the way there. And it's okay that it is. I think it's important to remember that we're all in the same boat together. And there's nobody that gets out of the military and just waltzes right into the greatest thing that ever happened to you. There's always more to the story. So don't believe the LinkedIn hype.
That's right. And we're all so competitive. It's easy for people to make it sound like, oh, it just worked out, but they don't tell you, they give you the highlight reel. They found the perfect job, or what seems to be the perfect job, but they don't tell you the hundreds of conversations they had before that led to that connection.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's the true advice nugget there, right? And maybe switching this from the person who's transitioning, maybe the advice you just gave is to the person who's advising the person who's transitioning. Don't gatekeep the information. Don't just chalk it up as luck. Actually try to communicate some of the ground level things that you did that led to the luck. And a lot of us, especially veterans, the self-deprecating, or you're trying to be humble, but the humility can come from saying, hey, no, I actually worked really hard for this. Like I did hundreds of steps in order to set myself up for that luck. And I think that's a really strong piece. Like, not everybody listening is just transitioning. There's people that listen who also assist with transitions. So be honest about the work you put in to set your transition up for success.
Yeah. And be as flexible as you can during that process when you're searching and talking to people. I mentioned that I did dozens and dozens of informational interviews. And in each of those, at first, I was honestly just talking to people who worked in industries that I sort of had an interest in, and was just hearing about their experience so that I could either rule it out or pursue it, and just trying to narrow my focus, because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got out of the Army. I knew what I enjoyed and I knew what I thought I was good at, but I didn't know how to translate that into opportunities in the civilian world. And the only way that I started to understand that was by talking to people in these different industries and trying to understand, well, what's their mission, and does that match up with something I'm interested in doing? And it's okay to say no. I mean, I talked to a guy one time that was in like liquor distribution, and because I was like, well, that's cool. I like bourbon and I like to sell things, and I can see myself moving around and promoting that. And he completely talked me out of it at the end of the conversation, where at the end of it, I was like, well, I'm not doing that. But that was also time well spent having a conversation like that, because it's as important the things that you rule out as the things that you include.
That's such a great point. That inversion is so important. You ask somebody what they want to do, almost nobody can answer that question easily. You ask somebody what they don't want to do, they can list a dozen things off within 15 seconds. So if you have those informational interviews, you really inform that side of what you don't want to do, and all of a sudden that narrows the aperture for what you do want to do, and you can more accurately decide there. So I love that point.
It also helps you sharpen your vocabulary to better explain. You get better at it with practice, explaining like what you did in the military, and then having someone help you develop your vocabulary to be able to understand what an equivalency like that would look like in the civilian world. So in my case, I knew that I liked negotiations. I liked relationship building. I liked international stuff. I liked talking to people, but also I enjoy listening to people and helping them solve their problems. And after talking to a few people in the civilian world enough times, there was a consistent theme that kept coming back, which was like, well, maybe you should think about like sales or business development or something like that. And after hearing that a few dozen times, then I was like, well, maybe that's where I'm headed. So yeah, tremendous value in informational interviews and just talking to people as much as you can.
Absolutely. Well, awesome. Thanks again, Louis. This has been great, man. I appreciate you taking the time to come on with us.
No, I hope it's been useful, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this, and what you all do is fantastic. And so whatever I can do, and I wish you all the luck in the world in the future.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.